Hello, it's Henry here again, and today I wanted to talk to you about trekking poles. Now, when I started hiking in the late 1980s, there really didn't exist, and you basically hiked along with your pack and maintained your balance and all the rest simply with your legs. However, in the early 2000s, I began to do some trips into New York State and began to climb some of those, pretty significant hills. They're mountains that they have there. And what I found was that, especially coming down the hill, my knees just took a beating from the effects as you kind of hazard your way down the hill. And I'd seen other people with poles, and of course I had used poles when I was cross-country skiing. And so I decided to give them a try, and I've never looked back. Now, the main point of trekking poles is to help you maintain your balance and to aid you in your propulsion. So using your arms to give you some effort when you're going uphill or to slow you down going downhill, as well as helping you maintain your balance if you slip or something like that. Now, trekking poles are typically made out of aluminum or some other type of light metal. There's a lot of effort today made in the industry to make the poles really light, as if this is something I suppose people are interested in. The vast majority of the time, the trekking poles are supported on the ground. So, obviously if they're 20 pounds, it's not going to work, but it's trivial differences in the weight isn't really going to matter. For me, the most important thing is how stiff the pole is. We'll just take this pole for a moment here and extend it out. Now, if you get into a difficulty and you need to plant this pole and it bends a lot, then depending on how much weight you're putting on it, it's either going to bend enough it's going to break, or you're still going to lose your balance because the pole isn't doing what it's supposed to do. So to me, vast majority of what I'm gaining from this is how stiff the poles are. Now, as I've mentioned before, I'm a 6'3", 230 pounds plus my gear. So if you add a pack, it's easily 260, 270. So having a carbon fiber pole that is really flexible and very light really doesn't work for me. The other thing is a lot of the poles don't extend enough as well for my height. So about 10 years ago or whatever, I'd gone through different poles. I got these ones from Black Diamond. They're by far the best poles I've ever used. They are elliptical, so they're wider here and thinner there, and it gives them more strength. They're slightly heavier, but honestly, if I'm holding these two, I can't tell the difference. There's no material difference here. However, these are incredibly strong, and they don't bend. And so you can depend on them when you plant the pole if you're in a problem, or using to push on them or whatever. These poles aren't going to bend. So that's certainly my advice. Is I know I went to some various hiking stores and there wasn't a pole in the place that I could just consider purchasing because they're simply all too flexible, and it just doesn't work for me. Now, some people might say, well, gee, I've used a hiking staff or a cut up piece of wood or something like that, and that's of course the classical stability factor. But let's think about a little bit of the physics here. So when you stand on 2 feet, you're inherently unstable. You could fall forward or backward, or across the plane of your feet's position. Now, with a third point of reference, a hiking staff perhaps, you have a 3-point stance and you're going to be, for the most part, stable. However, when you're walking, the staff is in the air, it's being lifted, and so oftentimes you're still only on a 2-point stance. It's better than nothing, absolutely. But when you go to a 2-pole system, such as trekking poles, now, generally speaking, you're going to have at least one of the poles on the ground. You'll be moving them one, then the other, and so the 3-point stance is maintained for a much larger percentage of the time, making you more stable. And especially with weight, and especially in the backcountry where a fall and an injury could be a problem, I think this is well worth the effort to do this. And these poles are, when I bought them, are just a little over $100 a pair. So, and they last a long time. On the bottom of a trekking pole, with very little difference, are generally made out of titanium or some other really hard metal. These small bits with a cup in the inside. And when you stick those and they hit it on a rock or something, they generally catch on an edge and they don't slip. This is much more durable than just a sharp point, which would probably break off in time. Some of these poles are designed so you can unscrew these things and replace them when they're broken. Now these two poles don't have that capability. When my first set of these, when they gave up, I contacted Black Diamond. They said they don't sell them anymore, but he had some extra bottoms and he sold me those, which was wonderful. So now I have enough of them probably to last me. So these poles extend, and you can see in the case of these Black Diamond poles, they are a 3-point pole. So I'm going to put it in the ground here for a minute. Whereas these round Power Plus poles I had from before are a 2-point pole, and they're the same height. I extend my poles to 1.40 m, and I'll show you why in a few minutes here. But if you see my arm on the pole, it's roughly horizontal. When you figure that you're holding it here, it's roughly horizontal, very similar to the approach you'd make with a cross-country ski pole as well, similar one anyway. Now, how do you hold the poles? The poles themselves, if you just grip them all the time, my guess is that your hands are going to get tired after a while. And so you need an attachment system that is not going to be dependent on your grip. So what I do, this is something I learned for cross-country skiing, is you put your hand through the strap, and now the strap is the attachment point, and you can pull down on the strap. You can still grip the pole and flick it and tip it out or whatever you're going to do, but the actual force, where you're going to have to really hold on to it hard, is done through the strap. Now clearly, if you do that, it's going to chafe on your wrist. And so what I have done here is I hike with gloves. Now these are cross-country ski racing gloves. They have no insulation. I don't find that they get hot in the summer for some reason. They work pretty well. I can also use them to wipe my face off if I'm sweating. And the bugs can't bite through them either. So there's a lot of advantages. So when you walk like this, the strap is on the glove and you don't notice it. On these Black Diamond poles, you have a pad which spreads out the effect of that, which also makes a difference. So I've been hiking with gloves and poles now for almost 20 years, and I couldn't imagine going without it. It's a safety factor, and it's also a performance factor as well. Now, let's put so you can see, one other thing here, of course, is you see that this is a 2-section pole, this is a 3-section pole. The main point here is that the 3-section pole is going to be shorter when it's collapsed. So let's compare them here. You can see that you get not much, but a little bit of a difference, 3 to 4 inches. So it's not really that big a deal. Let me just make sure I put it all the way in. Yes, it did. Now, it depends, of course, how you're transporting them and all that kind of thing. The other thing is the 2 types of latch systems. The common one on generally cheaper poles is this twist system. It works pretty well. Once in a while, I'd noticed one pole had gotten slightly shorter than the other one, and I'd have to adjust it. But generally speaking, it works reasonably well. Whereas the better quality ones have the clip system, and you can pull them out. And what's allowable here is there's a screw to adjust it, so you can make sure that this isn't going to move. and it is the better of the two, I think, for my argument, for especially if you're carrying a fair bit of weight, so that if you do fall or lose your balance, you're going to want that pole not to slide in and cave in or something like that. I think maybe, and this is just a guess, with the longer shaft, if you have less support, because there's only the one joint, where things are probably doubled up and stronger, there may be a slightly greater chance of it bending. I've had one pole bend on me in my entire life, so I don't know how big a hazard that really is. Now when you're walking, we have basically, in the primary situation, we have three different situations. We're going to be walking on largely flat ground, we're going to be walking uphill or downhill. And so this is the idea here. One of the things that I don't think you should do, and I see this all the time, and I'll give it to you this way, is I see hikers walking with their poles like this. And other than giving you a little bit of support if the ground's uneven, it's really pointless. What I think that we should consider doing when we're walking on level ground is similar to what freshman skiers do, where the poles are around 45 degrees. Now, the mathematicians in my audience will remember that if you do this and you push down the pole, 70% of the force of my arms will be communicated to the ground, and 70% will be communicated straight back through the magic of trigonometry. And that's a wonderful thing, because that helps you, it actually gives you some propulsive force. Now your arms are by no means as strong as your legs, but nevertheless, your legs pushing forward is a bit of a different muscle than just holding you up. So this you can feel it when you push, that there's a non-trivial force there. And now when you're hiking, you're pushing with one arm then the other, so of course you're going to get less force. But it's still significant, and it's a good workout for your upper body as well. Now obviously we don't get a glide when we're hiking, but it's still going to help you with your propulsion and reduce to some extent the strain on your legs. The next thing is when we're going uphill. Well, let's move the camera and we'll talk about that. On an uphill situation, this is reasonably smooth ground, of course, but an uphill situation, you're going to need additional help to help push you up the hill with the weight you're carrying. And it can be warm. You're lifting your legs higher than you normally would, which is also tiring. So once again, the pole's pushing behind you. Sometimes there you'll do a double push, then stop, then do another one again, depending on how steep the hill is and all the rest. This is a really effective technique, and it can give you up to 20%, from what I've been told, of the amount of forward force that you'd be getting anyway. Now coming down a hill is a greater concern because of the danger of injury. The amount of energy that you have down the hill is a function of the speed squared. So if you're going 1 meter per second down the hill, a certain amount of energy. If you're going 2, you have 4 times the energy. And this is going, of course, lead, if you stumble or anything, to a much more significant injury. There's a much greater chance of you getting hurt on a downhill, and the best way to prevent that is to go as slow as you can. If you don't have poles, you're using your knees to slow yourself down, and you'll find that if you're working on non-trivial ground, you'll find that your knees are going to feel it after a while, unless you've had a lot of training. Whereas, if you use the poles, the 20% that I suggested earlier is now in front of you. And you pick a rock or a piece of ground, and you put your poles out, and it holds you as you go down. And this keeps your speed slower, so that when you go down the hill, you're picking your way and not overdoing the weight and reducing by far the factors of chance of injury. The final aspect of today's video is, of course, the dealing with hazards, dealing with loss of balance, and so forth. Now, when you're walking uneven ground, you've got to pay attention. This is not a sidewalk or a street. This is, as you say, a wilderness, and you have to pay attention. You can fall, and If you land on a rock with your knee, you may well have to be evacuated. It's that simple. So you have a responsibility to walk within your limits, pay attention to what you're doing. However, muddy ground and other things always, once in a while, everybody slips a little bit. And that's the nice part about the poles. They're light enough in our arms that very quickly you can plant a pole and arrest your fall. Once in a while you may go down, but you're going to go down a lot slower. And so these are a tremendous advantage to that. I can think of a couple of times I fell or almost fell before I got poles, and I was pretty lucky that I didn't get hurt. The other thing you can do as well is some cases there's wet ground or something and they have a single log leading across, and this log could maybe roll a little bit, or maybe it goes down in the water a little bit as you walk on it or something like that, and of course it's probably slippery. So once again, your poles are wonderful because you can put them out to the side and balance yourself as you go along the log. So that's another feature that's very nice to have. And another one is, let's suppose you're coming, there's a mud hole of some kind on the trail and you want to go around the outside, but there's branches or the land is kind of tilted. You can walk along that land and put your poles in the water as you go and be perfectly safe and get your way around it and keep on going without even really breaking stride. So you really have some features, and I'm as you can see by the video, I'm a total fan of trekking poles and how important they are, I think, to enjoyable and safe hiking. Thank you very much for watching.